Welcome to the Scoop Educational Masterclass brought to you by the National Association of Nutrition Professionals. Your host is Andrea Granson, the NANP's Educational Program Specialist. The information presented in this masterclass is for educational purposes only. Please note that holistic nutrition professionals do not diagnose, prevent, treat, cure, prescribe, manage, or heal diseases or medical conditions. They are also not licensed in any state and work with clients, not patients.
Hi, fellow practitioners. Thank you so much for joining this masterclass. I'm so excited to get into the details of how to use this protocol specifically for clients with PCOS-related depression. But a lot of the tips in this masterclass can be really good for any client that has autoimmune issues or anyone who's dealing with mental health issues. And this is a great holistic way to add in some mental health therapy with our nutritional therapy and begin a more holistic approach to helping our clients. So, with that, let's jump into the slides.
One of the reasons I developed this protocol is because I saw in my own clients just this overwhelming amount of physicians, practitioners, health experts that were being involved in this process to help manage each symptom of PCOS with a different take. And so, one of the reasons that I developed this protocol is to kind of help bridge some of those together and to help work with other like psychologists, therapists in order to help these individuals and integrate care because that is something that's really rare in today's world is that integrated care aspect where you talk with their physician, you talk with their NP, you talk with their psychologist. And that was one of the reasons that I developed this protocol is to help integrate all those things together using nutrition as that bridge. So this is kind of what I saw in general, and this is what I see with a lot of women with PCOS. And I'm sure if you work with PCOS clients that you will see the same thing. So usually they visit a gynecologist and use contraceptives to manage cycles. Usually PCOS is very painful. And so oral contraceptives or something like the Mirena, IUD, hormonal birth control is usually the route that they go to manage cycles and to manage the issues that come with period pain and ovulation pain as well. Then, on top of that, I've seen a huge uptick, I'm sure you guys have too, in prescribing Ozempic for weight and insulin resistance, specifically in PCOS clients. I see a huge increase in people using Ozempic for this insulin resistance, which can be helpful for sure, but it needs the right nutrition paired with it. Then they're also seeing a psychologist to treat the mood disorders that also come when you have a chronic condition that is impacting your life multiple weeks out of the month. And with this, I usually work really closely with the psychologists or therapists because often in their practices, they are so overwhelmed and so busy that they often overlook inflammation and nutrition. Not all, but just some. And then they usually come to us as the functional nutritional therapy practitioners to bridge that root cause and for client empowerment. So that is the whole point of this protocol is to bridge all of these things. We address their cycles with cycle syncing. We address the insulin resistance by increasing fiber, reducing sugar, and managing their hormones and addressing their hormones with sufficient nutrient intake. And then on top of that, the whole point of this protocol specifically is to improve their mood, work with their SSRIs or antidepressants, using the nutrients and specific foods to help increase their mood and help with those mood disorders, and essentially work simultaneously with whatever medication they're taking, or essentially just improve their mood if they're not taking any medication and improve depressive symptoms because that can cause so many issues for our clients and it really makes it hard for them to complete a protocol. Now, I just want to take a minute and explain just how many women are really trying to manage symptoms of PCOS. So PCOS is one of the most prevalent endocrine disorders in women of reproductive age. And it's usually characterized by hyperandrogenism, ovulatory dysfunction, polycystic ovarian morphology, which can create all sorts of issues. The infertility it can cause, the changes in cycles and delayed cycles, no ovulation phase. It can create so many issues. So not only is so many women trying to manage these symptoms, but a lot of times when you have a a disorder like this, essentially if it's not in the diagnostic criteria, it gets ignored. Not on purpose, I don't think, but it just happens frequently. And so with PCOS, we're seeing that insulin resistance and depression are almost always a part of the picture, but they're not the diagnostic criteria, so they're not managed and they're not being addressed as much as the cysts are. The cysts are causing frequent pain, so physicians go in and either remove the cysts or prescribe hormonal birth control. With that, depression isn't being evaluated. Insulin resistance is probably being evaluated if there is a weight issue, but not always the way that it would be beneficial for the woman and certainly not beneficial for a long-term lifestyle. So we see this with like Ozempic or semaglutides being incorporated. Those can be good to help reduce weight, but it's not going to provide a lifestyle change that's necessary when you have insulin resistance. As you know, it's something that we got to stay on top of always. It's not something that just goes away forever. It's something that you actively have to be jumping on top of and being ahead of all the time. And especially women with PCOS, insulin resistance is what is exacerbating that ovarian androgen production and is also impacting the formation of cysts in their ovaries, which can affect so many issues. Insulin resistance, we know, also creates an imbalance of estrogen and testosterone, and that is creating this endocrine metabolic feedback loop that's just causing issue after issue, and they're being compounded. Even if depression and insulin resistance are not being addressed the right way or in a way that's impactful, it still needs to be addressed. And that is the whole point of this protocol, is to address the root causes of PCOS, not just managing symptoms, which that's why we're here. That's why we're practitioners. That's why we do what we do, so that we can help women in this way. And that's why this protocol is so helpful, is because it addresses these women's disorder at the root cause and what's making it worse, not just masking symptoms. So we know that PCOS affects a lot of women and depression affects a lot of women with PCOS, but just how many and what are the physiological links that connect these two? So, just to give you an idea of how many women with PCOS have depression or anxiety, it's 50%. So, half. I would say that's diagnosed. I've seen with my clients, I would say it's higher than that, at least my percentage. I haven't done studies, but I would say that in my clients, I see by the time they come to me, usually they have depressive disorder. So I would say it's higher than that, but statistically speaking, 40 to 50% of women with PCOS have depression or anxiety. Now, insulin resistance leads to inflammation, as we know, which the elevated cytokines disrupt serotonin and dopamine synthesis. Now, this isn't just natural serotonin and dopamine synthesis, this is also medication supported serotonin and dopamine. So, SSRIs, anti anxiety medication, antidepressants, that synthesis is also being affected by insulin resistance. So, this isn't just about naturally producing more serotonin, it's also about being able to use medication the way it is intended through reducing insulin resistance. Now, low progesterone from an anovulatory phase reduces GABA, which is the calming neurotransmitter, which is why we see such an increase in anxiety in clients with PCOS is because they're low progesterone and changes in cycle patterns. They're not building progesterone the way they need. They're not releasing progesterone the way they need. And so we see this increase in anxiety, specifically after a menstrual cycle. So during that follicular phase is when we see a big uptick in anxiety and the reduction of GABA. Now, the HPA axis dysregulation is common in PCOS and leads to cortisol inducing mood dysregulation. So that is something to keep in mind, is that the HPA dysregulation alone is leading to mood disorders. And so that can cause so many issues as well. Not just the insulin resistance, but there's a lot of factors that are working against good mood, healthy brain chemistry. And that is why it's so important that we address this PCOS and depression link. This is why we're addressing brain health and depression first in this protocol, is because it reduces executive functioning, memory, reward seeking, motivation. And this executive functioning piece is so important for our clients to be able to follow through on a protocol that we've meticulously created to help them and to help them see success, help them feel better. And it's really hard for them to follow through with that if they don't have the executive functioning in order to do so. What happens in a depressive brain is they go, okay, I need protein and healthy fats for insulin resistance, so I need to get something out of the freezer. Okay, I got it out of the freezer. Do I have enough time for it to actually thaw, or should this be tomorrow's meal? I don't want to just eat plain meat, so I probably need to I need to season it. Do I have the seasonings I need? Do I need to go to the store? I don't want to go to the store unless I have a list done so I don't spend money on things I don't need. And you can see this whole process and they go, okay, at the end of the day, without that executive functioning, they go, that's too overwhelming. I'm just going to throw in a pizza. And that's one meal. That's dinner. That isn't their snacks. That isn't a nourishing breakfast. That executive functioning piece makes this whole scenario seem really overwhelming instead of being able to say, I'm going to have this for dinner. I will use the leftovers for lunch tomorrow so I don't have to think about that. I already have this meat thawed. I have these vegetables steamed from the Sunday before. I will use those. That executive functioning is so important for their brain health and is a huge proponent in why a client can't follow a complex protocol when they don't have any energy or hope due to depression. So, a lot of these women have been struggling with this issue since they were 13, 14 years old, which can lead to a lack of hope in seeing changes with a protocol. So that's why we're focusing on nutrition that improves their mood and restores their capacity for change by addressing that executive functioning piece first. And addressing their mood increases their compliance and reduces dropout, which is the whole point. That's why we're trying to help them, is because we want them to implement these long-term life-changing habits and information that they can implement to create a better lifestyle for themselves, because insulin resistance is not something that goes away. It reduces, but if you already have insulin resistance and you have PCOS, these women are more likely to experience insulin resistance in the future. And it's not something that they just go into maintenance mode. It's something you have to be on top of all the time, as well as depression. It's something that they have to be actively doing things and eating foods to stave off that insulin resistance and depression. And so addressing it first is going to really help their compliance and help their overall success rate, which is great for us practitioners and even better for our clients. Explaining to our clients how depression can block healing can be really helpful for their ability to maintain consistency in a protocol as well. So, explaining to them that chronic inflammation affects the blood brain barrier and neurotransmitter synthesis. Now, we know that chronic inflammation can be caused from so many things: excess sugar, processed foods. It can be caused from something like PCOS going on in the body and causing a hormonal imbalance, something like stress, either internal or external stressors. They all can cause chronic inflammation. And that can essentially affect neurotransmitter synthesis, both neurotransmitter synthesis that's coming from antidepressants and natural neurotransmitter synthesis. So, depression also slows down digestion, reduces enzyme put out, affecting nutrient absorption. And then when you have nutrient absorption issues, then you end up with nutrient deficiencies, which also can create a worsening of depression or anxiety, especially in different phases. And so explaining that the reason that they feel bloated all the time, it can be come from that enzyme output. It can come from so many things, but that depression is also adding to their digestive dysfunction, slowing everything down, causing more bloating, which can also cause a lot of pain, especially when someone is already working with cystic fibroids on their uterus. That can be very painful as well. So, with that, addressing depression and addressing how depression affects healing can really be a good start to explaining why we're doing this protocol and why we're addressing depression first with insulin sensitivity at the same time. So let's address the foundations for this protocol. So first off, we're going to address our clients with a whole food diet, but we are going to specifically focus on replenishing the nutrients that have been deficient in their system for a really long time, either due to chronic stress or hormonal imbalance caused from PCOS. But we're going to focus on the specific nutrient deficiencies that are worsening their depression with antidepressant foods. Now, I will explain what foods are antidepressant foods in the next couple slides, but we're going to focus on those deficiencies first. We're going to increase their fiber for insulin sensitivity, but with specific antidepressant foods. So we're going to address the protein and fats and their macros and making sure their macros are right, but with these very specific antidepressant foods to address depression first. Also focusing on anti-inflammatory, so eliminating sugar, seed oils, ultra processed foods. All of these can be very helpful in that blood brain barrier and can be very helpful in reducing the amount of excess toxins they have and excess chronic stress that is going on in their body. And that can be very helpful for reducing depression as well. That gut brain axis support using probiotics, fermented foods, berries, again, these focus on whole foods, but focusing on the whole foods that will really help with their depression. And of course, lifestyle support, morning sunlight, strength training, nature exposure, some of these foundational things that we learn in holistic health that can be very helpful for everyone, not just people with PCOS. And so these are the foundations. It's important to understand that we're going to do some cycle syncing as well, but that's going to be in the future after we kind of get things all figured out depression wise and insulin sensitivity. Let's jump into evidence based antidepressant foods and the clinical application. So in 2018, LaChance Andrew Ramsey created the antidepressant food score. Now, I might be super biased, but I feel like the data from this study is the most underrated study in the last 10 years. I feel like this study needs to be front facing for every single person in every industry. I feel like the implications of this study are just so vast and it should be implied everywhere in every industry, not just nutrition, not just psychology, but everywhere across the board. Now, like I said, I might be a little biased, but essentially what happened in this study and what they did was they tested foods based on nutrient density and specific nutrients that improve depression. So they studied the nutrient density of certain foods and essentially created a profiling system to help determine how antidepressant a food was, and then created a list of the most antidepressant foods to, the top 20 most antidepressant foods. Now, This is just so wonderful. And if you take nothing else from this masterclass, this is what I want you to remember. I want you to remember this study. I want you to go look at it. I will read off the foods that are in this antidepressant food scale, but this can be implied in every single industry. Think about how much better our world would be if we took this antidepressant food score and we listed these foods and it was used in, adolescent therapy, if we used it in nursing home food protocols, if we use this in different scenarios where any mental health is being addressed. This study, I truly think, is something that could change how we address so many different issues, but we can't do that unless we know about it and unless we know what the study revealed and actively incorporate those foods into our diet frequently. So, whether you're someone who works with women with PCOS or whether you're someone who runs a practice, whether you work with gynecologists, regardless of what your industry is, remember this and read this study. It is so wonderful. If you Google the antidepressant food score, I promise it will pop up. It is just so life-changing to have this information and life-changing for our clients as well. So I will stop groveling and go over the importance of it. But the key to this, including this in our protocol, is including greens. You're going to notice that dark leafy greens are very high on the antidepressant food scale, but watercress, spinach, and beet greens are a priority over some lower scoring cruciferous vegetables like kale and Brussels sprouts. So they still are high in the nutrients that improve depression, but watercress is by far the highest. And so on the plant side of things, but that is something that I want you to have your clients include frequently into their diet is the dark leafy greens, watercress, spinach, beet greens. And then omega-3 rich animal proteins as well are emphasized for their dual benefits on inflammation and neurochemical balance. So these targeted dietary interventions align with the clinical findings linking nutritional adequacy to improved mental health outcomes and mood stabilization. So it's important to understand that the developers of the antidepressant food scale, they're not in the nutrition field. Technically, they are in the psychology field. They are psychologists who wanted to develop this and are really a huge force in implementing nutritional psychiatry and the connection between the two. And so just know they were really the purpose of this study wasn't to prove nutrition helps depression. It was to show how certain foods improve psychiatry, essentially. So it was made with the right intentions in mind and from a psychological standpoint, not from a nutritionist standpoint, which means it can be used in both fields very well. And I just love it. So let's get into what foods are on this antidepressant food scale. The top 20 plant-based antidepressant foods, they're rich in folate, magnesium, iron, zinc, fiber, and polyphenols. And number one on this list is watercress. Then we have spinach, romaine lettuce, Swiss chard. I'm sure you're noticing dark leafy greens is definitely the standard. And then red bell peppers, mustard greens, endive, kale, broccoli, pumpkin, parsley, dandelion greens, arugula, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, sweet potatoes, carrots, black beans, and lentils. So those are the top 20 foods on the antidepressant food scale. Now, the top 20 animal-based antidepressant foods, they are rich in B12, zinc, iron, omega-3s, and highly bioavailable protein. So number one, and has the highest AFS score overall, and that is oysters. So oysters are the number one antidepressant food. And then we have mussels, octopus, clams, crab, tuna, salmon, sardines, rainbow trout, anchovies. I'm sure you're noticing a theme there. Definitely fish are the top contenders for your antidepressant foods. Then we have liver from beef or chicken, eggs, especially the yolks, turkey, chicken thighs, the dark meat of the chicken, Beef, grass-fed is definitely the better route to go. Lamb, pork tenderloin, goat cheese, whole fat yogurt, preferably from grass-fed cows, and kefir, which is a fermented dairy. So, those are the top contenders for animal-based antidepressant foods. Something I want you guys to keep in mind as practitioners, this is something that I see all the time, is even though the top 10 foods on the animal antidepressant food score are all fish. Now, I live in a very landlocked area. Getting any of these foods, any oysters, mussels, even salmon, is extremely difficult where I live. And if I can get it, it's not good quality. And so, a part of making this protocol for the bio individual and adjusting it to their life is adjusting it to where they live and taking into consideration what kind of animal-based antidepressant foods they actually have available to them, not just in their grocery store, but from their butchers, from, different resources. I live where it's almost impossible to get oysters. I live in a place where beef liver is very available, and it might be different for other people. So, when taking into consideration how to address and use this protocol for each individual, it's really important to address the fact that they might live in a place that has access to very different antidepressant foods than usual. Now, luckily, thanks to transportation, a lot of the plant-based antidepressant foods can be found frequently. Some are definitely found better in some times of year than other seasons. But when it comes to animal based specifically, it's really important to focus on what they can get in their area because, oysters might be the highest antidepressant food score. But if they can't get them or get low quality oysters, is it really doing them any favors when they can get local grass fed beef and vice versa? It's not worth eating beef if you have access to oysters and mussels. And I will give you guys some of my top favorite recipes. I love swapping recipes with other practitioners and talking about my favorite foods to recommend to some clients I have. So here are my top favorite recipes that I like to incorporate these antidepressant foods. When recommending recipes to our clients, I think it's really important to have as little amount of time and as little ingredients as possible, especially when addressing the executive functioning part of depression. And it can be really daunting to start a recipe that has tons of ingredients, takes a lot of time, especially with depression. And so I always recommend focusing on two high antidepressant foods in your dinners, using those dinners as leftovers for lunches. Depending on the person, this might work, it might not. But I always recommend using two foods with a high antidepressant food score. One of the dishes that I love is this ground turkey, watercress, and mini potatoes. It has that comfort meal kind of aesthetic and kind of feel to it, but it also has two foods with very high antidepressant food scores, which is your watercress and your turkey, all wrapped up, easy to eat, and can all be done in the same pan, so little dishes as well. One of my other favorite meals is this everything but the bagel seasoned salmon and spinach. You can replace the spinach with watercress, you can replace it with kale, any of those dark leafy greens. One seasoning, one source of animal-based antidepressant foods, one source of antidepressant foods from the plant-based side. Super easy, can be done in the air fryer, ready to go. My next favorite is oysters, spinach, and rice. Spinach is definitely what I find to be the most available, but again, any of these can be swapped out with those dark leafy greens. I just find that simple, easy meals that are as nourishing as possible is what's going to help our PCOS clients the very most. This recipe is one of my all-time favorites. It's tuna stuffed bell peppers with some feta cheese, fresh dill, lemon, really aromatic, a super delicious, quick and easy meal that can be done that has lots of antidepressant foods in it, as well as herbs and spices that also help with that aromatic sense that you smell it before you get that brain to gut
connection, your body starts to produce stomach acid. It is one of those meals that I know is just going to nourish them from the minute they start cooking it until they finish it. I love this meal and love recommending it to all of my PCOS clients. The whole point of including these recipes and including these foods is so that their nutrition will mimic antidepressant pharmacology. Now, we're not replacing antidepressants. We're not trying to use these foods instead of. We're using them in order to help their brains produce more serotonin and more dopamine, even with the hormonal imbalances that are occurring while they have PCOS and while they're having some of the PCOS symptoms. So, conventional antidepressant pharmacology experts its effects by enhancing synaptic concentrations of monoamine, serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. So this protocol essentially leverages the nutritional psychiatry principles by utilizing nutrient-dense foods that influence the neurochemical pathways by specifically targeting microbiome integrity, insulin sensitivity, and monoamine neurotransmitter synthesis. So it helps their body synthesize these nutrients in order to create serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. It helps their body to reuptake that serotonin if they're already on SSRIs. It helps their body reuptake that dopamine and transmute that into good moods and consistent moods. These select fibrous foods are emphasized due to their high AFS score and quantifiable index of nutrient density related to mental health resilience. So that's why we're using these antidepressant foods, is because they are high in fiber, at least the plant side ones are. And then with that, the animal-based antidepressant foods are high in omega-3s, which we know help drastically with insulin sensitivity. And so by using these antidepressant foods, it creates the perfect base to use as a launch pad for addressing all their other symptoms that they're dealing with PCOS. And it really addresses the root causes as well as the mood disorders that come with PCOS so that they can have the best outcomes possible and remain consistent in order to see the best results long term. Phase 1 of this protocol requires a minimum of 4 weeks. So what I like to do is I say a minimum of 4 weeks, but it really depends on each woman. And I like to do this phase of the protocol and focus on this phase of the protocol up until they end up having a menstrual cycle. So with PCOS, that can be infrequent. And so if they start off with already having a menstrual cycle at the beginning when you start working with them, I would still go a minimum of 4 weeks. Now, the whole point of this is to help with microbiome modulation. We want to address their digestive issues and create a surplus of nutrients that are going to help their body with depressive symptoms. And by doing this, we also want to address their digestive system so that they can absorb these nutrients and create serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. So we include antidepressant foods and prioritize based on the highest antidepressant food scores that are bioavailable in their area, with the micronutrients critical for neurotransmitter synthesis and inflammation modulation. So keep in mind food sensitivities as well. That is something that can be very disruptive to the healing process and to depression is food sensitivities. They can create anxiety, they can create depression or worsen them. And so keep in mind food sensitivities as well when including antidepressant foods. Then macronutrient distribution, high fiber, high fat, primarily omega-3 rich sources like those fish, if that's available. Low carbohydrate to enhance insulin sensitivity, and the carbohydrates we are going to include are going to be very high in fiber and very high on the antidepressant food scale. Protein sources are emphasized with fatty fish, if available, or grass-fed beef. Or just, hormone-free animal products as much as possible. The microbiome therapeutics include psychobiotic strains of evidence for mood regulation. One of my favorite supplements to recommend to anyone who has PCOS or anyone that is working with a mood disorder is from Microbiome Labs. I love their products. I love their Mega Pre. I love that they come in little sticks. They're super functional. They have the best products, I think, and that I've used them. I have loved them. So if you're looking for a new line of digestive supplements that really helps specifically with mood disorders and with mood disorders connected to the microbiome, Microbiome Labs is the way to go. I have absolutely loved that. So including microbiome therapeutics can be really helpful, especially in this phase. And I recommend their gut biome package. It is so wonderful for this phase. And then including in kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt, any sort of probiotics that come from whole food sources can be a really good implementation in this phase to help their digestive system to absorb the nutrients that we're trying so hard to get into their bodies to get into their bloodstream and into their brain to start having better mood regulation and better overall mental health. So, like I said in the beginning, a minimum of 4 weeks, and then we transition into a cycle syncing therapeutic nutrition, but only after they have had a menstrual cycle. And so this might take a while depending on the person. It can take months, but essentially this whole phase is in support of getting as many nutrients to their brain via their digestive system as possible. Phase 2 of this protocol is where things get a little interesting depending on who you're working with and what their current symptoms are. So phase 2 involves cycle syncing and really optimizing hormonal regulation. Now, one of the hallmarks of PCOS is not having a regular cycle. And so cycle syncing kind of seems anti-productive when you have someone who isn't naturally ovulating and isn't having a regular cycle. But I'm going to teach you how to address that in each of your clients. So the second phase is therapeutic protocol, which incorporates cycle syncing, a nutrition-based strategy designed to align their dietary lifestyle interventions, and the 4 distinct phases of the menstrual cycle. So cycle syncing obviously modulates hormonal fluctuations by supplying specific phase micronutrients and optimizing endocrine function, reducing PCOS-related symptoms, and supporting mental health. It's important to understand that at different phases of their cycle, they are going to have different amounts of nutrients that are needed, but they're also going to have different amounts of norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. So something that I frequently see in PCOS clients is that after they have a menstrual cycle, especially if it has been a very long time since their last menstrual cycle, anxiety increases drastically the week after. Depression symptoms seem to go more in the luteal phase and the menstrual phase, but then after their menstrual cycle, it increases their anxiety. And so that's why addressing mental health through every phase, and especially if they're not cycling, is essential, because we want to address, if they're not cycling, we want to address them as if they're in the follicular phase, which is building for the ovulatory phase, because their body's having a hard time ovulating. And so we want to support that progesterone production that is not happening through the follicular phase. So starting with the seeds that we're going to talk about that really help with the follicular phase, and starting with foods that specifically help with the follicular phase, is what you want to focus on if they're not having a regular cycle, because it will decrease that anxiety, it will decrease the depression, and it will help their body build that amount of progesterone needed to then have an ovulation, which will then throw them into the luteal phase and then a menstrual phase, which is what we're trying to achieve. So continued emphasis on antidepressant foods sustains neurotransmitter support and inflammatory control. So we're not going to reduce the amount of antidepressant foods, we're just going to time them a little more. And then if menstrual history is unclear, and initiate the follicular phase, like I talked about, in order to support estrogen synthesis and follicular development. So if the menstrual phase begins, which we want it to, and that's essentially the signal to go into phase 2, we really want to support their follicular phase as much as possible in order to help their bodies go into an ovulatory phase. So this approach supports individualized hormone balancing, and even in the context of birth control use. So if they don't have birth control use, I still want you to recommend having them cycle through seeds, cycle through nutrients that they would use for each of their cycles for one, so then they get the amount of nutrients they need and specific vitamins and minerals that they need in a cyclical fashion. Now, one of the ways we're going to support seed cycling in a very easy to follow manner is seed cycling. Seed cycling can be so functional for those with PCOS related depression because it doesn't take any cooking, it doesn't take any prep, it just requires them to buy a certain seed, eat a different seed each week, and use those for snacks. One of the things that I always recommend as well is getting each seed that they get, make sure they're salted. This will help with electrolytes, but will also force them to drink more water, which we know water is so essential for insulin sensitivity. And so this kind of addresses that in 2 ways with minimal effort. So we want to make sure they're getting in their fatty acids, which they're going to do, their specific micronutrients and minerals through these seeds, which will happen. The salt will allow them to have electrolytes, but will also increase their desire for water too, so that they don't even have to think about it. They're not using an app. It isn't something that takes extra effort. They eat something salty and go, I am thirsty. And so it's going to increase their water, which we know will help drastically will increase their insulin sensitivity as well. So that is a tip that I find is very helpful in the seed cycling world. Just including these seeds in their snacks throughout the week can be a really good way for them to support their mental health without feeling like it takes a lot of mental load in order to do it. So seed cycling is a food-based intervention designed to optimize phase-specific mineral intakes and enhance endocrine function. So let's get into what seeds are important to cycle through. For the menstrual phase, we want to focus on pumpkin seeds. Now, the pumpkin seeds I like to recommend the most are green pumpkin seeds called pepitas. They are so good for estrogen balance, especially in the menstrual phase. And again, making sure they get salted pumpkin seeds is really going to help them increase their water, which is also going to increase their insulin sensitivity and reduce their pain receptors as well, especially if they're dealing with painful periods. Increasing their water intake will reduce the inflammatory response and reduce their overall pain response as well. So the green pumpkin seeds are high in iron, magnesium, and potassium, essential for the menstrual phase. Now, in the follicular phase, we want to recommend flax seeds, which are so good for digestive symptoms. And because of the omega-3 fatty acids, they are really going to help with that production of progesterone, which women with PCOS have a really hard time with building the right amount of progesterone. And so flax seeds can be very helpful with that. With that, just make sure they don't have an egg white allergy. Flax seeds can mimic egg whites in the body so well that our bodies can, if they have a sensitivity to egg whites, it will also be sensitive to flax seeds. And so keep that in mind too, especially when the follicular phase is the one that we're focusing on with clients that aren't cycling. And you want to focus on the follicular phase the most if they are not cycling. But if they have an egg white sensitivity or have a sensitivity to flax seeds, have Crohn's, something that doesn't allow them to eat flax seeds, then switching out for another source of omega-3 fatty acids like cashews and soaking and sprouting the cashews would be a better route to go there for that person in particular. Then the ovulatory phase, we want to do sunflower seeds, which are great for B1, B6, and selenium. Now we know that ovulation doesn't always last a full week, but we still want to use this for a full week to make sure that their bodies get in that amount of B1, B6, and selenium. And then the luteal phase, we want to focus on sesame seeds. My personal favorite is to get that in through tahini in like salad dressings or use it to thicken up soups, but it is high in calcium, manganese, and zinc. We know that zinc can be really helpful in testosterone production too, and so that can help with that depressive symptoms that usually happens in the luteal and menstrual phases as well, especially for those with PCOS. Now, just because these seeds weren't listed on the antidepressant food scores doesn't mean they don't have key nutrients for mental health. So this is why I want your clients to include these seeds in each phase and what they help with in the mental health sector. So in the menstrual phase, we need to increase iron for serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine synthesis. Deficiencies are linked to fatigue, low mood, and poor concentration, which happens a lot during the menstrual phase because of the lack of iron. So increasing iron during that can definitely improve mood and specifically the depressive symptoms that come with the menstrual phase. Magnesium is one that is really closely associated with anxiety, depression, and insomnia. That is something that we know is directly linked to insulin sensitivity. Is if you're not sleeping good, your body is going to have insulin resistance. Insulin resistance and sleep are so closely correlated that anything we can do to reduce insomnia, even just for the week of their period, is going to drastically help their insulin sensitivity. So magnesium is so important, and getting that in through that seed cycling can be really helpful for their sleep production as well. Potassium as well will support brain signaling, and low levels are linked to irritability and cognitive dysfunction, which we all need less of in general, but certainly during the menstrual phase as well. It also helps with electrolyte balance and will essentially allow the brain to get excited about things, whether it is finding that new motivation or just out of that depressive phase where nothing sounds good, nothing feels good. That menstrual phase depression can be really debilitating, and it usually happens in the middle of us working with a client. And so if we can mitigate that, we can overall help their overall success. With that, the follicular phase, the omega-3s are high in anti-inflammatory properties, which we know. They're neuroprotective, which means they help support brain health in general. We know that insulin and sugar in the blood can be so damaging to the brain in general. And so having anything with neuroprotective properties is so essential for long-term brain health, especially if you're someone who already struggles with insulin sensitivity and that blood-brain barrier being permeable. And then it also supports membrane fluidity and neurotransmission. It also reduces depressive symptoms and stabilizes mood, which we know omega-3s stabilize blood sugar, and blood sugar is directly linked to mood. So stabilizing mood and blood sugar with the same seed is really helpful. We also know that they support hormone balance, and antioxidant activity protects brain tissue as well. Now, in the ovulatory phase, we want to focus on that B1 and B6 and selenium. Selenium specifically supports thyroid function and mood regulation, and the deficiency is associated with depression and cognitive decline. So if they're really struggling with this part and struggling with the ovulation part, what I also recommend is, on top of sunflower seeds, including some Brazil nuts as well, just because they are so high in selenium. So B6 is actually a cofactor in serotonin and dopamine and GABA synthesis. It supports methylation and stress regulation. Low levels are linked to mood disorders and poor sleep, which we know is devastating. B1 is essential for brain glucose metabolism and supporting energy production, and cognitive function. The deficiency in B1 may cause irritability, depression, and brain fog. Anyone who is in this health field knows that brain fog and just cognitive decline is on the rise everywhere we look. So the more we can get not only our PCOS clients, but all of our clients in general to, especially women, to cycle this way and to use these nutrients in a cyclical fashion will help reduce cognitive decline, which is something we're seeing so frequently. And that's why implementing this as more of a habit and more of a lifestyle change is so important for those with PCOS, because these deficiencies are so closely related to long-term cognitive decline issues. In the luteal phase, we have calcium, which is essential for neurotransmitter release. It regulates our cell activity, and imbalances may contribute anxiety or mood changes as well. Manganese is also a cofactor in neurotransmitter synthesis and antioxidant enzymes. It supports brain energy metabolism, and both deficiency and excess can impair neurological function. So that's why manganese is so good to get in through natural sources rather than taking as a supplement, because both deficiency and an excess can cause neurological issues as well. So zinc supports synaptic function and neurogenesis and modulates neurotransmitter activity and HPA axis. The deficiency is linked to anxiety, depression, and cognitive decline. As practitioners, I think it is so important to understand that there is this truly intricate relationship between depression and insulin resistance and PCOS. And this reinforces the need for personalized nutrition first approach. Our clients are using so many different resources and practitioners, physicians, psychologists to try to mitigate all these symptoms. And really, if we do a nutrition first approach, we can mitigate a lot of these issues, and we can start addressing a lot of these symptoms in a way that's beneficial for all those involved and really helps create this intricate care for this person that's really individualized. By addressing metabolic dysfunction through targeted nutrition support and dietary strategies, you guys as practitioners can significantly improve both mood and hormonal regulation in women with PCOS. I've seen it. It's worked drastically. It's worked for me. It's worked for my clients. I know it will work for you, especially if we address antidepressant foods first. And as clinicians, recognizing and treating this biodirectional link is essential for achieving sustainable whole body outcomes. If you work in a clinical setting, working together with physicians, working with psychologists is really what we need to do, not just with PCOS, but with so many other forms of care, and creates a truly holistic approach to nutrition and addressing mental health in conjunction with nutritional therapy. I truly understand and believe that nutritional psychiatry and using nutrition to improve mental health is the way we're going to see things go in the future. And it's something I want to see a lot more of because it's so beneficial for so many people, not just those with PCOS. So with this, I hope that this masterclass has been truly informational and transformative for you in how you address PCOS and how you address clients with maybe autoimmune issues or any issues where you might want to take a look and say, okay, should I address depression first? Should we start with antidepressant foods first? Like I talked about earlier in my description of antidepressant food score and talking about the study that was done, go check out that study. It's one of my favorite studies I've ever read. It will truly transform the way you address certain protocols with depression with that antidepressant food score and those results. So with that, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining me in this masterclass, and I cannot wait to hear how you implement this in your own practice.
NANP members can earn 1 continuing education credit for participating in Scoop Masterclasses by taking the corresponding quiz, which can be found in the Learning Center of your My NANP dashboard.